This is the lecture for Successful Failure, What Foucault Can Teach Us About Privacy Self-Management in a World of Facebook and Big Data by Gordon Hull. So the first topic is this word normative, which comes up here on the first page. So in philosophy, and especially in a class like this, which is focused on ethics, we're often interested in, not often, we're very interested in normative stuff. And so what is normative, or what is normativity? So normativity refers to the idea of sort of evaluation or judging according to sort of like some sort of norm. So the norm is kind of like a standard against which things are being judged. And so when you evaluate something as like better or worse, or good or bad, or right and wrong, or virtuous and vicious, or whatever, you're making a normative judgment, a sort of evaluative judgment. And if some of those words sounded familiar, it's because when we talked about morality a few lectures ago, I said this is what morality is like. And so morality is sort of one of the biggest examples of normativity. Like every moral judgment is a normative judgment. When you say something is morally good or bad, or morally right or wrong, or whatever, you're making a normative judgment. And so morality is kind of like maybe the biggest kind of normativity, or the most commonly talked about kind of normativity. But there are other sort of realms of normativity, or other kind of normative judgments we can make. So for instance, judgments about art, like that's a good movie or a bad movie, that's a beautiful painting or an ugly painting, or whatever. These are judgments according to some sort of standard. So these are normative judgments. They're not moral judgments. You're not saying like, the painting is morally good or whatever. You're saying it's artistically good or aesthetically good or something. So that's a kind of normativity. And in fact, there's lots and lots of kinds of normativity. There's better and worse art. There's morally better, morally worse, but also, there's better and worse athletes, better and worse food, stuff like that. So there's lots of kinds of normativity. The kind of normativity we're most interested in this class is a kind of ethical normativity. But like broadly speaking, that's what it is to say sort of something is normative. It's related to evaluating or judging. And one of the ways we can understand this idea of normativity is by contrasting it with what is not normative. And so the label we use for this is often descriptive or positive. And so descriptive judgments or positive judgments, or descriptive claims or positive claims, aren't like judging the world according to some standard or something. They're just sort of describing how things are. So if I say something is 2 meters tall, or 4 kilograms heavy, or it's 39 degrees hot, I'm not like judging it according to some standard or something. I'm not saying it's good or bad or better or worse or something. I'm just describing it. I'm just sort of giving a description. And so those are descriptive or positive claims as opposed to normative claims. And so you might think, like the sciences, for instance, or like history or whatever, these are descriptive or positive fields. History doesn't tell us what's good or bad, or science doesn't tell us what's good or bad. It just tells us how things are, or what things happen. History says this happened and this happened. It doesn't say it's good that this happened or bad that it happened. So in a course like this, an ethics course, we're mostly going to be making normative judgments, like this is good or bad, it's right or wrong or something. Whereas if you were taking like an AI programming course, you wouldn't be making those judgments. You would be making positive or descriptive judgments, like coding it like this will make it do this, or this kind of programming language works like this. So that's the idea of normativity. It comes up here when he says, given the totality of their failure, why are they so persistently taken to present a normatively adequate understanding of privacy? So what would be a normatively adequate understanding of privacy? Well, notice it's not like descriptively adequate or something. It's not like we're just trying to describe, or positively adequate. We're not just trying to describe privacy in terms of like, what is it like or whatever. A normatively adequate understanding of privacy would be one which sort of is including an understanding of like what's right and wrong, good or bad. Like, so it's an understanding of privacy that includes like, how much privacy should we have? Normativity is involved in the idea of like should or ought. It would be good if things were private, or bad if things were private, stuff like that. So that's that. The next topic on the next page, he talks about this thing called panopticism. So just to give you a bit of background, the panopticon is the design for a prison that some philosopher, Jeremy Bentham, thought up back in the 19th century. And basically the idea is it's a huge like I don't know if it's huge. It's like a tower, and it's a circular tower, and it, on all the rings of the tower, you have all the prison cells, and in the center of the tower, it's sort of like an open courtyard. In the center of the tower, you have like another tower. You have the guard tower. Inside the guard tower, you have a guard. You can see out of the guard tower into the sort of inner circle, the inner side of the circle with all the prison cells. The prison cells are all sort of, they have windows facing in the inside, so facing the guard tower. And so the guard tower can see into each of the prison cells from the center tower, but it's like a one-way mirror or whatever, so the prisoners cannot see into the guard tower. And the thought is that you could really have just like one guard in the tower, in principle monitoring every single prisoner. So of course the guard can't be looking at every prisoner at once. Like, however many prison cells you can see from the tower, you can't see behind you or whatever. So it's not like they can see the whole circle. And in fact, you can only really look at like one cell at any given time. But the prisoners can't see where the guard is looking. So as far as each prisoner is concerned, they sort of they can't ever feel like they have privacy because the guard could be looking at them at that moment. They don't know. So that's the idea of the panopticon. It's sort of like constant potential observation, and because you have constant potential observation of each of the prisoners, it's sort of as if you're constantly monitoring each prisoner, even though in fact you aren't monitoring each prisoner. You just have one guy in there. Maybe you have 0 guys in there, but the prisoners don't know, and so they feel as if they're constantly monitored. So that's the sort of the panopticon, or the idea of a panopticon. And then you can imagine how it's relevant to privacy and this idea of surveillance and being online and things like that. Next, on 90, he talks about the notion of imminent critique. So he says the goal is to offer an imminent critique in the sense that the problems with privacy self-management are entirely predictable using the economic tools that are also used to defend the theory. So, I mean, that basically explains what imminent critique is, but just to be fully clear about it, the idea of imminent critique is saying, like, look, just using stuff you already accept, just using like the tools that you already use and the commitments you're already committed to, here is a critique I can offer of what it is that you're doing. Maybe there's other critiques we could offer which are not sort of imminent critiques, which are like bigger critiques, not only given the stuff that you're doing, here's what we can say, but also you shouldn't even be doing the things that you're doing, or you shouldn't even be using the tools that you're using. So an imminent critique is kind of like a limited sort of critique in the sense that saying, look, I don't even have to like convince you of any completely different theory or any different sort of paradigm. I don't have to convince you to give up everything that you're committed to or whatever. Just given what you already accept, I can convince you that you're sort of going wrong or that you're doing something wrong by your own lights or something. So just to sort of understand what he's trying to do here, he's not saying, everything that these companies are doing is good or whatever or anything like that, but he's saying just given what they're already committed to, just accepting that they're sort of correct to be doing some stuff, we can still critique what's going on there just using their own tools. And so that's just to fill out a little bit more of the notion of an imminent critique so that you know what the goal is in this paper. On 95, in this footnote, he talks about SNS, and I think it may come up, and not even in the footnote, even here in the paragraph, and then earlier even, and then maybe throughout the article. So this is just, it's an acronym for social networking system, like Facebook or something, and I don't think he explains it anywhere, so that's just to be clear about what that is. And then finally, on 95, he talks about the notion of a classic prisoner's dilemma. So it's a collective action problem, he calls it, which it will almost always be individually rational to forego privacy, even as the social benefits of privacy remain collectively rational. So in case you've never heard of the idea of a prisoner's dilemma, the thought is that two people get like arrested for a crime. The police don't have enough evidence to convict them of the full crime. They just have like circumstantial evidence. So what the police need is confession. And so the police they separate the prisoners and they say to each prisoner, look, if you confess, if you tell us everything, we'll let you off with like a year in jail or whatever, and the other person will go to jail for 10 years because now we'll have the evidence to convict them. But they offer the same deal to each prisoner. And if both prisoners shut up and don't say anything, the police only have enough evidence to convict them for 2 years each. So if they both keep quiet, they'll both go to jail for 2 years. But each of them thinks, oh, well, if I fess up, I'll only go to jail for 1 year, and the other person will get stuck with the 10 years. And so they each confess, and then now the police have the evidence to convict them both, and so they each go to jail for 10 years. So that's a case where if they could sort of get together and trust each other, if they could trust each other, or if they could talk it out or something, the prisoners would each not say anything and they'd only go to jail for 2 years. So sort of collectively, it's better for them not to do anything or not to talk to the police. But if they're stuck individually and they can't communicate with each other and they can't trust that the other prisoner is going to keep quiet, then individually it makes sense for them to confess, because if they confess and the other person uh, doesn't confess, they get off with 1 year. And if they confess, or if they don't confess and the other person does confess, they're stuck for 10 years anyway, so they might as well take the chance of getting off. So that's a case where the individual rationality is to do one thing, even though collectively it would be better if they could do something else. So these are cases of collective action problems, because if they could act collectively, it would be better for all of them. And because the police set it up so that they can't talk with each other, and because they're prisoners or they're criminals, so they're not very trustworthy, they can't trust each other, they can't kind of act collectively in a way which would best promote their self-interest.